This is a model to help us understand how conflict arises between people, often in dramatic or intense relationships or interactions. And it was conceived by a guy called Stephen Karpman in 1968. And it involves 3 different roles. One that's kind of called a one-down role, and 2 that are called one-up roles. These 3 roles are the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor. And I think understanding how these roles work can really help us to identify how we could be resolving potentially destructive interactions that are quite draining on our energy. So let's start with the victim role. And I think the victim role is quite self-explanatory. It's the person who feels helpless and powerless, like they can never cut a break or they can never get ahead in life. They often think things like, this always happens to me. Another role in this drama triangle is the rescuer. And this person is someone who takes responsibility for other people's problems, and they kind of make it their own problem. But at the same time, they don't really look at their own life, which could in fact be a complete mess. And they'll see people who might be going through a difficult time and think, oh, look at that person. They need help, I'm nice, so I'll help them. Or maybe something a bit more parental, like, if that person did what I said, they'd be happy. And I think the dynamic that we often see play out between the victim and the rescuer is something that we see in movies and romantic comedies all the time. It's something that we almost think is normal, but it really is an unhealthy interaction. So the third role in this triangle is the persecutor. This is a person who is frustrated. They're kind of self-righteous and a bit of a bully. And they might think things like, they're wrong and I'm right and they need to do what I say. Or that person will get what's coming to them. Another thing that's really important to recognise about this triangle is that each of these roles move between each other. So, the rescuer can become the persecutor, or the persecutor can become the victim, or the victim can become the persecutor. So they all kind of move around. Another concept that's really important to understand when talking about the drama triangle is this idea of the starting gate. We tend to have this one role that we most naturally sort of enter into. So for instance, one person might often go straight to the victim role, where someone else might jump into the rescuer role. And the other thing that's really interesting about this is that our starting gate role sort of is part of what we see as our own identity. And like I said before, we shift from one role to the other. Inevitably, we all end up in the victim role, feeling powerless and helpless and unable to do anything. And that's why it's really important to work out strategies for how to get out of this triangle. So I guess that brings me to the next question: how do we get out of this drama triangle? So let's take it by looking at each role again. So in the one-down victim role, we need to become a survivor. In order to do this, we need to think like a problem solver and ask ourselves questions like, what do I want? And what steps can I take to get what I want? Another useful thing to do is to reflect on the good things that are going our way. So we can make a note of it in a calendar or a diary. Ask ourselves questions like, what are 3 things that I'm grateful for today? Or at the end of each week, we could ask ourselves, what did I achieve this week? So let's move on to the rescuer role again. If this is where you tend to find yourself sitting, you need to think of yourself as a teacher or a coach rather than as a rescuer. You need to remember the golden rule about teaching a man to fish. So you need to support and encourage the person in ways to identify and solve their problems, rather than rushing in to solve it for them. You can ask them things like, what is it that you want to see happen in this situation, or what do you think you can do to change this? Also, you need to make sure that you set boundaries. Setting boundaries around the time that you're able to listen to the person and letting them know that is really important. In some ways, it's a similar situation with the starting gate persecutor, who, like the rescuer, puts themselves in this sort of one-up powerful position. The difference is, with this role, is that you need to become a challenger. You need to be firm but fair in your approach to people. And to help the person recognise how you're feeling, you need to sort of address the consequences of their actions and set boundaries. So for instance, you could say something like, if you keep your side of the agreement, I can keep mine. As with a rescuer, it's important to remember to set these boundaries and recognise that this isn't your problem to solve. By freeing ourselves from this drama triangle, we are able to have happier, healthier relationships with people. We won't feel so drained and powerless. And we'll also be able to identify toxic relationships that we may in fact be better off without.